She stood on the splintering platform beneath the bone-white sky, her veil already collecting dust. The train had hissed away 15 minutes ago, leaving behind the scent of coal, a half-rotted apple core near her boot, and the remains of a promise that had never meant to be kept. Eleanor Gray was 43 years old. She had not worn a dress this fine since her confirmation, and even that had been borrowed. The hem dragged in the red dust, the lace sleeves choked her elbows, and the ivory gloves, though pristine at morning, had gone gray at the fingers from worry. She clutched a single suitcase, her entire life folded into corners and buttoned shut. The man who had summoned her with letters scented in tobacco and ink, Horace Albee of Three Crows, Montana, had promised warmth, a farm, and his late wife's wedding ring. But no one had stepped from the train but cattlemen and crates. The station master, a boy with one milky eye and no patience, had told her, "Ain't no Albee came round. He's gone south, I think, or in the ground." The dust swirled up again, pricking tears into her eyes. She did not cry, though. She had cried enough during the war and afterward, when her sister died birthing a child that followed her within the week. Life had taught her to weep quiet, if at all. "You waitin' for somebody?" asked a voice behind her, dry as fence post wood. She turned slowly. A man leaned against a broken hitching rail, broad-shouldered, his hat shadowing a face that looked carved rather than born. His coat was black, like it had once been for Sunday best, now dulled and patched at the elbows. A silver band hung on a leather string from his neck, too small to be his, worn like memory. She straightened. "No," she said. The man scratched at his jaw. "Well, you look like somebody been left behind." "I was," she answered. He nodded once. "Name's Malcolm Hart, widow. I run a cattle line-up near 6 Widow Buttes. Ain't much, but it feeds me and the mare." She didn't reply, not yet. His gaze did not wander over her, did not tally her age or check for youth where none remained. He looked at her like one might look at a fireplace in winter, useful, but only if it burns. "I ain't offerin' charity," he said, "but if you need work or bread, I got room." Her throat clicked as she swallowed. "Why?" He looked down at his boots. "Because a woman at a station with no one to meet her ends up in worse places than a ranch." She almost told him no, not because she didn't believe him, but because the shame of it clung to her like smoke. But her money was gone. Her brother would not take her back, and she had nowhere else. "I can work," she said, lifting the suitcase. "I've butchered pigs, pulled flax, stitched through winter with fingers split open." He took the case from her hand without asking and started walking. She followed, veil blowing sideways. The town behind her held only one street and too many watching eyes. No one said goodbye. The ride to his land was 7 miles uphill. The wagon pulled slow. Eleanor sat beside him in silence. Her dress bunched beneath her, corset stabbing into her ribs, but she didn't fidget. Hart didn't speak either. The mare moved like she knew the road by heart. "Why'd you come?" he asked finally, not looking over. She debated lying. Instead, she said, "A man wrote me letters. He'd lost his wife. Said he wanted a companion who could cook and read and bury him when the time came." "You answer all your letters." "I answer the ones that sound like they mean what they say." He gave a short laugh. "Then I reckon you got fooled." "So did you," she said, pointing at the ring on his string. That shut him up. The house was one room with a linta shed off the back and a stovepipe that wagged like a crooked finger. The porch sagged in the middle. Wind howled through the eaves like a woman mourning, but there was wood stacked and smoke from a fire already burning. "You can sleep in the loft," he said. "Ain't had need for it since my nephew went south." She climbed the ladder with aching legs, found a thin mattress and a quilt stitched from every ugly scrap ever salvaged. But it smelled clean. She lay down in the dress, in the gloves, too tired to undress. That night Coyote screamed. She slept without dreams. Weeks passed, the dress was packed away. She wore canvas skirts, flannel shirts, boots that blistered her heels until they didn't. She milked, chopped wood, boiled fat for soap. Hart taught her how to use the rifle when he was away long on cattle drives. She never asked about his wife. He never asked again about the station. But once in spring, when she lit the stove before he rose, she found his coat draped over the chair, and in the pocket a photograph, creased, colorless, and nearly worn through. A young woman with straight teeth, eyes too sharp to smile fully. Eliner stared at it a long time before putting it back. On Sundays, they sat outside in silence. One afternoon he said, "I saw a man once shoot his own horse to save it from starving. He cried after, but not for long." Eliner turned her face to the wind. "I saw a man drown his daughter because he couldn't feed her. He never cried at all." Their silences became heavier after that, but not colder, like stones inside a river. One night, nearly a year after her arrival, Malcolm came home with a cracked rib, bruised from a fall. She sat beside the bed and poured laudanum into his mouth by drops. He grimaced, sweat beading at his hairline. "You ever think of leaving?" he whispered. "All the time," she replied. He looked at her, eyes glassy. "Then why don't you?" She tucked the quilt under his chin. "Because I don't know who I'd be anymore, away from here." That was the first time he touched her. Not a kiss, not even a hand, just the back of his fingers on her wrist, light as a passing wind. They were married in the fall, no guests, no priest. She wore a brown dress and washed her face with well water. He cut 2 strips of hide and tied them round their fingers. "There's no one to say the words," she murmured. "There's no one to hear them," he said. So they said nothing, just stood in the barn with the cattle lowing nearby and the snow already threatening. And they stayed like that, quiet and upright, 2 things stubborn enough not to fall. But the past, Eliner would learn, does not stay buried, not in places where the ground is shallow and the dead don't stay down. And the man who left her at that station, Horace Albee, was not dead, not yet. When his name came up again, it wasn't through a letter. It was through the mouth of a girl who bled from the lip and trembled when she spoke. "You're Mrs. Hart?" she asked. Eliner nodded. The girl swallowed. "He's taken another, my sister. She's not yet 16. And Eliner, still in her apron, the butcher's knife slick with lamb fat, felt something coil inside her chest that had nothing to do with pity. It felt like the start of a reckoning. The girl's name was Clara, and she came from a hog farm east of the Gallatin River, 10 miles from where the land turned to shale and the trees grew twisted. She had ridden bareback through half a night to find Malcolm Hart, but it was Eliner she faced, standing on the porch with a towel still over her shoulder, her hands dripping lye-scented water. "My sister," Clara choked. "Horace Albee took her from us 3 days past. Came with papers, said Pa sold her to clear the debt." Eliner said nothing at first. She studied the girl's eyes, the cuts along her jaw, the way her voice hitched like something inside was too broken to hold steady. The kind of break that didn't come from falling, the kind that came from being used. "How old are you?" Eliner asked. 14, the girl whispered. Behind her, Malcolm stepped onto the porch, his hat in one hand, a shotgun in the other. "You believe her?" he asked Eliner. Eliner nodded once. "Yes." He looked at Clara and his jaw clenched. "Then saddle up, we ride at dusk." The Hart Ranch sat on the edge of nowhere, and from there they crossed into land stitched with secrets and silence. Eliner wore trousers now, too big in the waist, cinched with a borrowed belt. Her hair was pinned beneath a wool hat, her rifle slung crosswise over her back. The wind grew sharper with every mile. They passed rusted traps, fence posts leaning like drunkards, a raven nailed to a tree as a warning to thieves. By nightfall they reached the edge of a settlement that didn't have a name, only a saloon called the Velvet Tongue and a boarding house with shutters nailed shut. Clara pointed to the south, toward a barn lit with yellow oil lamp glow. She said, "He keeps her there, like a prize." Elinor's teeth ground together, not from cold. "Wait here," Malcolm told Clara, then turned to Elinor. "You sure you want this?" She didn't answer. She was already walking. Inside the barn, the smell hit first, straw soaked with waste, sweat gone sour, a perfume she couldn't name but knew too well. There were curtains hung where stalls used to be. A gramophone played faintly. It was not a brothel yet, not officially, but it was a place where girls went in and did not come out the same. Elinor found Horace by the fire. He was heavier than she remembered from his photograph, but the eyes were the same, cold, calculating, empty. He saw her and blinked. "Well," he said, "I'll be damned." "You will," she replied. He laughed, half choking on his own surprise. "Didn't expect you to follow me, sweetheart. Didn't think you had the spine." "I don't," she said. "I have something sharper." Her rifle came off her back without tremble. Horace's smile dropped, but not fully. He reached for his belt, slow, deliberate. She shot him through the thigh. The sound tore through the barn. Girls screamed. Someone dropped a tray. Horace fell, blood already seeping into the hay, his mouth gaping in stunned outrage. "Where is she?" Elinor stepped closer, boots crunching glass. He spat. "You think you're some kind of hero. I think I'm a woman you should have met with more respect." A door creaked behind the curtain. A girl stepped out, barefoot in a nightdress too small. Her wrists were bound in lace. Clara's sister. Her eyes went wide at the sight of Elinor, at the rifle, at Horace bleeding. Elinor met her gaze and said, "You coming or not?" The girl walked forward, past Horace, past the others now watching from shadows. She didn't run, she didn't look back. They didn't stay long. Malcolm had already scared off the watchman. Clara was waiting with the horses, her hands white-knuckled on the reins. When she saw her sister, she cried out and covered her face. Elinor didn't look back until they were 4 miles out. Then she asked, "You think he'll live?" Malcolm glanced sideways. "Don't know, don't care." They left the sisters at a church halfway to Bozeman, safe enough for now. On the ride back, Malcolm said, "You're not the woman I thought you were." Elinor wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "No, I'm not the woman anyone thought I was." That night she scrubbed blood from the cuffs of her shirt, then lay beside Malcolm in silence. He didn't touch her, but his warmth was there, steady and unflinching. And she didn't dream, not that night. Spring brought sickness to the cattle and wolves to the hills. They fought through it. Elinor learned how to stitch torn hides and skin a carcass without waste. She trapped rabbits when meat ran thin, and Malcolm taught her how to ride bareback over broken terrain. They didn't speak of the barn, or Horace, or the girl who left with a cut lip and came back wide-eyed. But the quiet between them deepened, became a thing that no longer held pain but understanding. Then one morning, a rider came. A federal badge on his coat, a pistol at his side. "You Elinor Hart?" he asked. She stepped outside, hair still damp from the basin. "I am." He handed her a paper. "Horace Albies filed a charge, says you attempted to murder him in cold blood." Malcolm stepped beside her. "You bring a warrant." The man frowned. "Not yet, but I will." They watched him ride off, dust curling in his wake. Elinor turned to Malcolm. "You think he'll try again?" "Oh, he will," he said, "but next time he won't send a man with papers." She nodded. "Then we prepare." They fortified the house, boarded the windows, set traps. Malcolm dug a trench near the ridge and showed her how to sight a rifle from half a mile. Elinor took to sleeping in her boots, rifle beside the bed. The waiting was worse than the attack. Weeks passed, then a month, then 2. One night, lightning cracked the sky, and the horses screamed. And the man came. Not Horace. 3 of them, all mounted, all drunk. "Where's the bitch who shot my cousin?" one shouted. Alina didn't wait for an answer. She lit the fuse to the fire trap Malcolm had rigged beneath the porch. The blast wasn't loud, but it was enough. One horse screamed and bolted, the others scattered. She stepped out, rifle raised. One man turned. She shot him in the knee. Another raised a pistol. Malcolm put a slug through his shoulder. The third fled, howling. When it was over, Alina lowered the rifle. Her arms shook, not from fear, from the weight of it all, the endless climb. She walked back inside and poured herself a glass of the whiskey they'd been saving for winter. Malcolm watched her, eyes unreadable. "You all right?" She looked at her hands, at the dirt under her nails, the cuts along her knuckles. "No," she said, "but I'm not broken." Outside, the rain began to fall. By the following winter, Alina knew how to shoot a rabbit through the eye from 30 yards, patch a saddle with wire and glue, and cut a man's throat without getting blood on her shirt. She did it in December. The man came at night, alone this time, smarter than the others, quieter. But he'd underestimated the cold, the wolves, and Alina's heart. She caught him near the coop, his knife still wet from killing the mare. He didn't beg, he smiled. "Albie sends his regards," he said. She stepped forward and answered with the blade, smooth and fast across the windpipe. His smile crumpled mid-breath. She buried him under the frost line and salted the earth. Malcolm didn't ask where she'd gone until she came in with the blood-stained coat. He looked once at her face and said nothing, just took the coat and burned it in the stove. That was the night she let him touch her. Not gently, not with ceremony, but with the kind of warmth that burned under skin long denied. They didn't whisper names. They didn't kiss. They moved like storm winds through a canyon, dangerous, fast, inevitable. And in the morning, she was still there. Malcolm never asked her to stop, never said a word when she started collecting names, listening to travelers who passed through the supply store, trading her preserved peaches for information. Albie had moved again, south through Wyoming, into cattle syndicates that bought girls with forged papers. The war had left so many dead, so many orphaned, that the missing barely made a mark on paper. But Alina marked them. She began to write letters of her own, not love letters, maps, names, times, sent to women she met in churchyards and behind butcher counters, to a woman in Helena who limped from an old beating, to a midwife in Cheyenne who'd once carried a colt in her apron. She never signed her name, but they began to write back. Each letter carried a story. A girl vanished from a railway car, a widow whose child never came back from the store, a boy sold for labor and worked to death in 3 weeks. Every one of them mentioned Albie, or one of his men. Malcolm read each note in silence, then set them to flame. He never questioned her. One evening, he stood in the barn brushing the flank of a colt they'd raised from birth. "You're building something," he said. "A war." Alina leaned against the doorway. "Not a war, a fire." He looked at her, then "What am I?" "The match." The letters grew darker. One woman sent a photograph of her daughter, then another of the grave they'd dug after finding her body in the river. The child couldn't have been more than 10. That night, Alina stood in the yard until her skin went numb. She didn't cry, but she didn't sleep either. The next morning, she packed a second saddlebag. Malcolm met her at the well. "Where?" he asked. She handed him a scrap of paper. It read, "Casper, January 19. A ranch house east of the hills, two girls, locked cellar. Albie arrives for auction. He read it twice. It's a trap. I know, she said. Then why go? She looked up at him. Because if I don't, those girls die. He nodded, then I ride with you. They reached Casper in a snowstorm. Elena dressed as a drover, broad coat, scarf up to her eyes. Malcolm played the part of a whiskey hauler. Their names were fake, their guns were real. The ranch was a two-story house guarded by three men and a dog that barked at shadows. They waited until the auction began. The men were drunk, distracted. Elena slipped through the back, Malcolm circled the front. Inside, the heat was thick, heavy with smoke. She found the cellar door barred and locked. It didn't matter. She shot the hinge. The girls didn't scream, just blinked at her with wide, feral eyes. One of them couldn't stand. We're getting out, Elena said. Malcolm met her at the back with the horses ready. Gunfire cracked as they rode. She shot one man through the throat. Malcolm downed another with a clean shot to the chest. The third chased them half a mile before a wolf found him. They left the girls at a mission run by nuns with iron crosses, paid for their care with a pouch of silver and a pair of boots Elena had stitched herself. On the ride home, Malcolm's arm bled from a graze. She stitched it on the trail. You could die doing this, he said. We already died, she replied, back at that station. He didn't argue. In April, she received a package. No note, no return. Inside, the ring Horace had promised her once, years ago, before he vanished from that platform, wrapped in a scrap of his shirt. Blood-stained. Malcolm raised a brow. Yours. She nodded. Now it is. He poured 2 drinks. To the dead, he said. To the buried, she answered. That summer the grass grew tall and sharp. Wildfires burned across the west. Girls ran from farms, and some found their way to Elena's door. She didn't ask how. She didn't turn them away. They built bunkhouses, dug a new well, planted squash and beans, and taught the girls how to shoot. One of them asked, "Are we safe here?" Elena looked at the distant hills, the vultures turning overhead. No, she said, but we're not helpless. They never asked again. Word began to spread. A woman in the north who hunted the men who hunted girls. A ranch where widows taught orphans to fight. Some called it myth, some called it dangerous. But every trafficker from Montana to Texas started sleeping with one eye open. Because Elena Gray Hart was no longer a woman waiting at the station. She had become the storm that arrived after. By the second autumn, the ranch had a name. Not one Elena gave it, nor Malcolm, but the girls. They called it the Reach, a word whispered like prayer, because it meant something more than land or fence or blood. It meant distance conquered, a place taken back. Elena marked the day with work, as always. She hauled firewood from the ridge, her gloves stiff with early frost, and oversaw the tanning shed where 2 of the older girls smoked rabbit hides for trade. No speeches, no banners, just breath turned white in the morning air and something steady pulsing behind her ribs, not hope, not peace, momentum. It was nearing dusk when the rider came. She watched from the fence as he approached, tall, lean, dust-ghosted. Not Albie, not one of his, but a traveler, the kind that knew how to ride quiet and kill quicker. He dismounted without greeting and removed his hat. You Elena Hart. She nodded once. He pulled a letter from inside his coat, from Wyoming. She opened it beneath the lantern's glow. The script was hurried, smeared in places by rain or sweat. Albie's dead. But his men ain't scattered. They're organizing under a new name, the Ridgewater Line, taking girls from the Dakotas, moving east. I figure you'd want to know. No name, no sender. She folded the letter and tucked it in her coat, looked at the writer. You rode all this way for nothing. He smirked, touched the brim of his hat. Rode all this way to make sure you got it first. Why me? Because the dead men we keep finding, ones with Ridgewater pins and their throats slit, they all had something in common. What's that? They whispered your name before they bled out. That night she stood on the porch beside Malcolm. The stars were sharp overhead, cruel and bright as shattered glass. I thought it ended with Albie, he said. It never ends, she answered. He handed her a flask. She drank. I can take a few girls south, he offered. Scatter, hide them. No, she said, we train them, all of them. The ones old enough to shoot, they learn. The rest learn how to vanish. You want to build an army. I want to finish what I started. He didn't argue. He just stood beside her while the cold set in and the dark grew teeth. The training began at first light. Elena worked them hard, no sentiment, no softness. They learned to ride blindfolded, shoot from the hip, track by hoofprint and broken twigs. She taught them to read maps, forge papers, write letters in code. Pain meant nothing. Only survival. And one by one, the girls who had come thin and broken began to stand straighter. The youngest, Della, 11, could gut a buck in 12 minutes and hit a tin can at 50 yards. At night, they told stories around the stove. Not the ones that hurt, not yet. Only the ones that made them laugh, even if the laughter sounded like rust on a blade. One girl, Anik, carved names into her rifle stock. Elena asked what they meant. Every one of them tried to sell me, Anik said. They ain't breathing now. Elena didn't tell her to stop. She handed her a whetstone instead. It was near Christmas when the Ridgewater Line sent their warning. A girl arrived half dead at the gate, branded, starved, rope burns on her ankles. Pinned to her coat, a note. Next time we take 20. You stay out of the Dakotas, or we burn your reach to the dust. Elena fed the girl broth, then took the note and nailed it to the barn door. Underneath it, she wrote, Come. They struck in February. 4 wagons, 12 men, rifles, chains, kerosene. But Elena had planned for this. She let them reach the eastern gate, let them light the first torch, let them laugh. Then she loosed the traps. Bare pits opened beneath their feet, rifles cracked from the silo. Della dropped a man from 30 yards. Anik put a bullet through the knee of the one carrying the matches. Elena moved through the smoke like shadow, knife in hand. When it ended, 9 were dead, 2 ran, 1 was left tied to the oak. She questioned him at dawn. No threats, no yelling, just quiet, patient cruelty. He broke in under an hour. They're gathering in Kansas, he said. New routes, new names, you're making them scared. You should be, she said, and walked away. Malcolm found her in the field after. You're bleeding, he said. She looked down, blood on her wrist. Not hers, it's nothing. You keep this up, he said. There won't be a reach left to protect. She turned to him then, truly turned, and he saw it, what lived behind her eyes now. Something past rage, something carved in the bones. There won't be a world left if we don't burn this out, she said. He didn't speak again for a long while. The spring that followed brought wind, and with it rumors. Girls arriving from Kentucky, Minnesota, even Ohio. Each one with a story, each one with a wound. And still, Alina trained them. Not to hate, to finish. By May, her name was carried in whispers on railcars, in jailhouses, in saloons where lawmen drank with their backs to the wall. Some said she was a ghost. Others said she'd carved her wedding ring from a man's spine. But the girls knew better. She was a woman. One who'd waited once at a station in a white dress. One who had buried that woman in the cold earth. And risen, knife in hand. Summer cracked the soil open. The sun burned the wheat gold and turned breath to ash. By July, the Reach was a fortress in everything but name. They'd carved trenches behind the northern ridge, strung bells on wire, built hidden compartments under the bunkhouses to smuggle girls out if need came. The river that once brought traders now brought runners, girls with no name, scars like maps, and nothing left but fight. Elinor stood among them daily, not as leader, not as mother, as proof. She bore her own scars openly now. The white streak where a bullet had grazed her collarbone, the burn along her wrist from the barn, the healed break in her knuckle from the night she'd caved a man's face in behind the dry goods store. But it was her voice that held them. "We're not building a new world," she told them. "We're burning down the one that tried to crush us, and we leave no survivors behind us." That morning they burned a Ridgewater flag in the yard and buried the ashes in salt. Word came in the form of a child. 9 years old, barefoot, carrying a bullet casing in her mouth. She'd been left alive on purpose, a message. Ridgewater had taken a church school outside Lawrence, Kansas. 37 girls inside. No ransom, no list of demands. Just fire. They'd locked the doors and stood laughing while it burned. Alina read the account 3 times, then handed it to Malcolm without a word. He said nothing, just touched her shoulder once, like placing a coin on a headstone. That night, Alina walked alone to the field where they'd buried the first girl who ever came to the Reach, a child named Mina who hadn't made it past her second winter. She lit a lantern, set it beside the grave, and knelt. "If I stop now, the world will keep swallowing them." The grave said nothing, but she heard wind through the wheat like breath through teeth. She rose and returned to the house. The next day, she called a council. Not just girls from the Reach, women from the outlying farms, others she'd written to, widows, runaways, sharpshooters, ex-cons, mothers of the dead. They came in 2s and 3s, some on horseback, some on foot, all with weapons tucked into worn coats and sorrow stitched into the creases of their faces. When they gathered in the barn, Alina looked out at them and saw no fear. Only fury. "This isn't revenge," she said. "This is correction." A woman from the border, tall, dark-skinned, bearing the burned scars of a raid, stepped forward and said, "Then tell us where to aim." They rode south at dusk. 23 in total. Malcolm stayed behind, not because he lacked the will, but because the Reach couldn't fall while its daughters rode into fire. He gave Alina a parting gift, a watch once worn by his father, shattered at the glass but still ticking. "It runs," he said, "even broken." She took it and kissed him once, not soft, but deep enough to remember. Then she turned her back and did not look again. Kansas was dust and gunmetal heat. They found the church ruins first, charred bones, half a hymn book, a melted crucifix. Alina picked up a strand of scorched ribbon. It fell apart in her hand. No one spoke. Then they followed the trail. It took them through mining towns and abandoned cattle posts, along the Missouri Bend and deep into territory where lawmen turned a blind eye or joined in. They raided safe houses, stables, rail cars. found girls chained to water barrels, others half dead in sheds with rats in the corners. They killed quietly, methodically. They left no prisoners. Word of Alina Hart spread like wildfire. The press called her a murderer. The girls called her Mother Blade. She answered to neither. She wrote one letter back to the Reach. Still breathing, still burning. Lay. By September, the Ridgewater men began to retreat. They hired bounty hunters. None returned. They sent firebombs by rail. Alina's women dismantled them before they could spark. One man, once a banker, now a trafficker, tried to offer peace in exchange for immunity. Alina found him in a brothel south of Fort Scott. She didn't speak a word before she slit his throat in front of his bodyguards. They didn't draw. They walked away. It was in the cellar of a farmhouse, near the Arkansas line, that Alina found something she hadn't expected. A list, written in ledger ink, neat columns. Name, age, cost, destination. Beneath it, notes in a different hand. Albee 1873, first purchase. 16-year-old, bride from the station, refused, lost track. Alina sat with the ledger for an hour. She traced her name, not written but implied. She was their mistake, the bride that ran wrong, the one that didn't vanish. She closed the book and lit it with the lantern's flame. When the others asked why she burned it, she only said, "Because I remember every name already." They returned north in silence. Not because they had failed. Because they were not finished. Ridgewater was broken, not buried. Its roots still curled beneath the skin of the country. Back at the Reach, the girls greeted them like ghosts returned. Malcolm stood waiting. She walked to him and placed her hands on either side of his face. He didn't ask what she'd done. He already knew. That night, she sat with the girls in the yard. They had grown taller, stronger, some already taught others. A few had taken new names, ones they'd chosen themselves. Alina looked around at them and saw something she had never dared to dream. Legacy. And still the fire in her belly did not dim. Not yet. Because there was still one man left alive. The one who had started it all. The one who had built the first chain. And she would find him. The name came in winter, carved into a sapling behind a hanged man's boots. Alina found it on a scouting ride, alone, riding the far ridge while the rest hunted deer. The man had frozen to the branch, eyes pecked out, snow crusted thick in his beard. Pinned to his coat was a note torn from a hymn book. He lives in the White House past the Red River Bend. Name's Ezekiel Gratch. Alina had never heard it spoken aloud, but the name pulled something cold from her stomach, something older than Albee, older than even the station where she'd waited in her wedding dress. She remembered a letter, long before the veil, before Montana, written in firm, tight script, offering a job as governess to a merchant's niece. Nebraska Territory, summer of '71. She'd written back, and never received an answer. 2 weeks later, her cousin vanished on the same route, found near the banks, torn and emptied. That name had never surfaced in the hunt. Until now. She told no one. Not Malcolm, not the girls. She packed light, rifle, rope, water, the broken watch. Left a note, "Don't follow. This is old blood." She rode at night, slept in barns, crossed rivers blind. Every step toward Gratch hollowed her, made her leaner, made her heart beat quieter. It was 6 days before she saw the house. It sat on a bluff above a rust-colored stream. its shutters white and pristine, porch swept clean, smoke rising calm from the chimney. Like a man who'd never known guilt. She left the horse half a mile off and approached on foot. Snow muffled her steps. She saw no guards. No dogs. Only the wind. She slipped through the orchard, around the barn, up the porch stairs, and knocked once. Not because she had to. Because she wanted to look him in the eye. He answered in a robe, silver hair combed back, eyes pale and half-blind. But he recognized her. Something in his jaw twitched. "Well," he said, "I'll be damned." She raised the rifle. "No, you won't." He didn't run. He stepped back and let her in. The fire was warm, tea steeped in a silver pot. On the mantel, books, portraits, nothing obscene, no chains, no ledgers. But Alina could feel it. The rot was in the walls. "You've come for vengeance," he said, sitting. "No," she answered. "Justice has memory. This is retribution." He smiled faintly. "And how many did you kill to get here?" "Not enough." He nodded, like a man at the end of a long book. "Do it quick," he said. "No." She stepped closer. "You trafficked them, sold them, broke them." She reached into her coat, drew a folded cloth. Inside, the broken glass of a child's spectacles. "You sent the letter. That girl was 12. His lips trembled. "I was only a part of it," he muttered. "You built it." Her voice was ice. And then she told him. Name by name. She recited them, not just the dead, not just the lost, but the ones who came through it, the ones who carried the scars, the ones who woke screaming and still rose the next day to learn to shoot, to heal, to build a life from the ash he left them. He began to shake. She handed him the rifle. "You can do it yourself, or I will." His hands trembled too much to lift it. So she did. But not to the head. She shot him through the gut. He dropped screaming, curling inward. "You made them suffer," she said. "You get to die slow." And then she sat. And waited. It took most of the day. By the time she rode back, spring was thawing the river. The reach still stood. Smoke from the chimney, girls in the field, Malcolm at the fence, a girl riding beside him, learning the reins. When Alina dismounted, she walked to the barn and cleaned her rifle in silence. No one asked, no one needed to. That night they held a gathering. Not a feast, there was no celebration. Only a fire and every girl, every woman, standing in a circle beneath the stars. Alina stepped forward, placed her rifle in the center of the ring. "I've finished," she said, "but you don't have to start the way I did." They looked at her, some crying, some fists clenched, some faces unreadable as stone. "I am not your leader," she said. "You are your own." Then she stepped back and let them speak. Not stories of what had been done to them, but of what they would become. One would travel south to teach girls to fight. Another would join the Pinkertons under a false name. A third would marry a woman in Colorado and raise goats and children in peace. Anak, now 19, would stay and train the next wave. And Della, sharp-eyed, grown now, would inherit the house. Years passed. The Reach turned orchard and school, refuge and forge. Alina grew gray, wore Malcolm's coat when he passed, buried him near the fence where he once carved her name. She sat on the porch every evening, rifle across her knees, eyes on the horizon. Not in fear. In memory. Girls still came, not many now, but some. And when they did, they always asked, "Are you her?" And she'd nod once, then hand them the first lesson. Know how to stand. The second came later. Know how to fire. And the last, know how to survive after. The day she died, they buried her beside the first girl. No speeches. Only silence. Only the wind through wheat and the sound of boots walking forward. Because that was her legacy. Not the blood spilled, but the girls who walked away unchained.